Hey, what is going on guys? RvzStealth here, and in today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the new strong and weak picks heading into patch 9.2. Now there's actually a lot of pretty big changes here for 9.2, and I definitely did not expect that because I feel like if they were to add in a lot of big changes, they should have done it during the preseason and not when season 9 is starting here for 9.2. So it doesn't really make a ton of sense for them to be adding all these changes in now, but I guess that's just Riot for you. So first up here, we have a bunch of different changes to Yorick, so a bunch of changes to his passive and to his ultimate. A lot of them are pretty minor changes in themselves, but when you add them all together, these should be some pretty nice changes for Yorick for next patch, and I think that for the lower elos especially, you should expect Yorick to be a pretty strong pick in the top lane. I would assume that he's going to be an S tier pick for 9.2. So his passive, he's getting a bunch of changes to where his ghouls are no longer going to deal reduced damage when they're far away from Yorick. The gold given by Mistwalker is being lowered. His ultimate's getting some changes to how it scales with health, so it's now going to scale a little bit more based off of Yorick's health instead of a base amount. It's also now going to have this new effect to where it's now going to follow Yorick and assist him until Yorick or the maiden dies, and you can reactivate the ability to send her down a lane or the nearest lane. So just overall some quality of life changes here to Yorick. I think that for next patch you should expect him to be a pretty strong top lane pick. So Shyvana is getting two different buffs for next patch. Her passive is getting a buff to where her damage or her bonus damage to dragon is being increased from 10% up to 20%, and then her E, her basic attack damage, is being increased from 2.5% of the target's max health to 3.25% of the target's max health. So two pretty nice buffs here to Shyvana. This is a champion kind of similar to Yorick that really thrives in the lower elos. Right now Shyvana is performing pretty well in iron, bronze, and silver, so I do expect that with these changes, especially because playing around dragon in lower elos isn't going to be something that's as coordinated, and your ability to take dragons in the early game with Shyvana is a lot easier, and it's going to get even easier for 9.2. I do expect Shyvana to be an A or even an S tier pick for lower elos for 9.2. So Jarvan's getting a buff to his E for next patch. He's getting a change to where the attack speed is being increased from 15% at rank 1 up to 20%, and it looks like it's just being increased by 5% at all ranks. So a pretty nice buff there to Jarvan. Keep in mind that not only himself, or not only Jarvan, gets the attack speed buff, but his teammates also get the attack speed buff. So a 5% increase there is pretty nice. It's also going to help him out with his clear speed in the jungle. It'll help him out with his dueling in the early game. So I think overall for next patch, Jarvan is going to be a solid A tier pick. So next up, we actually have some pretty decent buffs to Volibear. So Volibear, I recently featured him on my video of the worst champions for season 9. With these changes he's getting here though for 9.2, I no longer think he's going to be in that category because these are actually some pretty nice buffs here. He's getting a buff to his E to where the bonus damage to dashing or airborne enemies is being changed from a base amount to 8% of the target's max HP. Now this is actually a really nice change here because Volibear actually does not max his E out first. He maxes his E out last, so the 40 damage there, the 40 bonus damage to airborne targets isn't really gonna make a huge difference, but the fact it's being changed to 8% of the target's max HP just means that this is gonna do a lot more damage throughout the game, especially against targets who are stacking a lot of HP. His ultimate AP ratio is also being increased from 30 to 40%. That change doesn't really matter too much though, because you shouldn't really be building AP on Volibear. Overall, I do think these changes are pretty nice for lower elos. I just don't think that Volibear can really ever exist in higher elos just because of the way his kit works, but I think for lower elos for next patch, you should expect Volibear to be at least a B tier pick, maybe even an A tier pick for 9.2. So for Neeko, we have some pretty small buffs for next patch. Her W clone duration is being increased from 2 to 3 seconds. The bonus movement speed duration on her W is also being increased from 2 to 3 seconds. And then her ultimate, it's no longer going to slow enemies when she jumps into the air, but the leap duration is going to be lowered from 0.75 down to 0.6 seconds. So I think that overall, this change does not move Neeko up into the tier list. Right now, she's doing okay. She's not really that great of a pick. She's also not super bad. So I think think that she is going to stay a B/A tier pick for 9.2. And then the final buff to champions for next patch is to Aurelion Sol. He's getting a change to, or a bunch of changes to his Q here. So the recast minimum time on his Q is being lowered from 0.65 seconds down to 0.25 seconds. The stun duration is being changed, or the way it scales is being changed. It's now going to scale off of the disc size. So the minimum stun duration is being lowered. So it's going to be 0.55 seconds at rank 1. The max stun duration is going to be 1.65 seconds. And then it is going to scale up as you go later on into the game. Overall, even though they are reducing the minimum stun duration there, I think that because the recast minimum time is being lowered, it still should be a pretty nice change to Sol in certain matchups to where champions could just dive right onto you, and because of that recast time being 0.65 seconds in previous patches, you could just never hit your Q on the opponent if they stuck right up next to you. So because of that recast time minimum, even though the stun duration is going to be lower, it's going to allow you to hit your Q, proc your phase rush, and kite away. So I do think this is going to be a nice quality of life change to Aurelion Sol. I don't expect him to move up on the tier list due to these changes. I still think he's going to be a good A tier mid lane pick for 9.2. So if we move on to the champions getting weaker for next patch, first up here is going to be Aatrox. So his Q first swing AD ratio is being lowered, and then his E recharge time is being increased. Overall, not super impactful changes for Aatrox. These changes will make him weaker, but is it really going to drop him down in the tier list too much? I really don't think so. He's still going to stay like an A tier pick for both the top lane and the mid lane for 9.2. So for Brand for next patch, he's getting a nerf to the dot damage on his passive. It's being lowered from 4% max HP down to 3% max HP. So a 1% decrease there from 4%. So it is technically a 25% decrease in damage for next patch, which is actually a solid amount of damage increase. I still think Brand is going to be a strong support pick for solo queue though. He's just overall a very strong champion due to the amount of AoE damage he can pump out. And even though this change is going to make him a little bit weaker, I think at the max, it's only going to drop him down into A tier, and I still think he's going to be either an A tier or an S tier support for 9.2. So Cassiopeia is getting two different nerfs in quotation marks for next patch. Her W cooldown is being increased at the later ranks, and then her damage per second on her W is being lowered as well, more so at the later ranks. You don't max this ability out until last though on Cassiopeia, so the fact that it's only getting nerfed more so at the later ranks doesn't really make it that big of a nerf to Cassiopeia. Still expect Cassiopeia to be an S tier pick in the top lane, the mid lane, and in the bot lane for 9.2. So next up, we finally have some decent nerfs to Galio for next patch. Will these changes drop him out of S tier for 9.2? I think they could, but they're definitely not going to make him, they're not going to just make him go back down into the dumpster for 9.2. He's still going to be either an S tier or an A tier pick for the start of season 9. So his Q gust damage is being lowered there by 20 once you max it out. The mana cost is being increased by 30 once you max it out. So a pretty decent nerf there to the mana cost, and this might shift you into building or into going back to building Rod of Ages instead of a Protobelt Rush for 9.2. The Tornado AP ratio damage is being lowered from 1.33% per 100 AP of the target's max health down to 0.66% per 100 AP, so a pretty decent nerf there to Galio's Q damage. I think overall with these three changes combined here, this should drop him down out of being like the #1 mid lane pick for 9.2, but I still think he's going to be a very strong pick. He's definitely going to be a highly contested pick in the mid lane, and I still expect him to be like low S- tier for 9.2. So next up, we have some pretty controversial changes to Irelia for 9.2. Her passive, her Q, and her ultimate are getting changed. So her passive is no longer going to deal bonus damage to shields at max stacks. This is actually a pretty big nerf to Irelia because in the current meta, you have picks like Ergot, Sion, who are being played quite a bit right now, and those matchups are going to get even harder now for Irelia for 9.2. So into champions who do have shield, she is going to struggle a lot more. Her Q minion damage is being being changed from dealing double damage to minions to dealing a flat amount per level. So I think you will have to get used to this change as well. It should end up being a nerf to Aurelia's Q damage, or to her damage to minions. So this is also going to be a bit of a nerf there to her Q. And then her ultimate, this is where the controversial change comes in. Her ultimate is no longer going to disarm enemies if they pass through the wall, so they're just removing the disarm from her ultimate. This is going to mean that in the mid to late game, Aurelia's effectiveness is going to be a lot weaker. The disarm in a mid to late game team fight was just very, very strong. I don't think it really decreases her effectiveness as much like in 1v1 scenarios and in the early game, because what they're doing is they're increasing the damage for her ultimate there by a pretty good amount. So 50 damage there at rank 1, pretty good damage increase. The slow is also being increased from 60 up to 90%. So I do think that in 1v1 scenarios and in the early stages, because of the damage increase, because of the slow increase, it's not going to be the end of the world for them removing the disarm. But come mid to late game, Aurelia's effectiveness in team fights is going to drop drastically for 9.2. So I really don't think that these are going to end up being buffs to Aurelia for next patch. I do think she will even be getting weaker for 9.2. So Jax here, we have two changes to Jax. His base AD is being lowered from 69.67 down to 68. So really nice nerf there to Jax. That 1 AD off of his base damage is really going to hurt him for next patch. His leap strike damage is also being lowered there by 15 at rank 1, and it's going to be 15 at all ranks. So with these changes here, don't expect Jax to really drop down too much. Trinity Force into Essence Reaver makes Jax a complete monster right now. That 2 item spike is pretty much the best for any top lane pick in the current meta, and I just think that Jax is going to need more of a nerf to really drop him down on the tier list. So for Kassadin, his base armor is being lowered, his armor per level is also being lowered, so this will make him a little bit more vulnerable now in those AD matchups, which he definitely should be. I think that in previous patches, even in those AD matchups, Kassadin could survive the laning phase, and he didn't even have that bad of a time in certain AD matchups. So with these changes here, it is going to make him a little bit more exploitable in the laning phase. Does this drop him down a tier though in the tier list? I really don't think so. I still think he is going to stay an S tier pick. So next up, we actually have nerfs for Recon for 9.2. I did not really expect this because I feel like Rakan's already in a pretty bad spot for 9.1, but nonetheless, he's getting a nerf to his base armor. It's being lowered from 33 down to 29. The dash speed on his W is also being lowered from 2050 down to 1400, and this seems like a pretty big nerf here to Rakan. The delay on arrival before impact of his W though, it's being lowered from 0.5 seconds down to 0.35 seconds. So that might help out a little bit there, but I think the fact that his dash speed is being lowered by that much, it's going to make it a lot easier for you to dodge out on Rakan's W now. So I just overall don't really like these changes to Rakan, and I think that he's going to stay like down as a B tier support pick for 9.2. And then the final significant champion change for 9.2 is to Ergot. He's got 3 different nerfs here, and his base armor is being lowered by 3, his Q's mana cost is being increased by 10, and then his W's cooldown is being increased from 13 seconds up to 17 seconds at rank 1. So the 4-second increase there on his W at rank 1 I think is the bigger change, because this does mean it's going to give other champions a much larger window in the laning phase to look to trade against Urgot when that is on cooldown. So I think that his laning phase does get weaker here, obviously, with these changes, and I do think that he's going to drop out of S tier down into A tier for 9.2. So a nerf across the board here to AP mage champions in 9.2. Mirela Nomicon, the AP on the item, is being lowered from 80 down to 70. Oblivion Orb is also getting a nerf to where the AP is being lowered from 25 down to 20. The cost on Oblivion Orb is being increased from 1.5k up to 1.6k. So if you're rushing this item now in the early game, it is going to be a little bit harder to purchase, and it's going to be a little less effective. I still think people are going to do it though. The fact it does give you 15 magic pen just makes it a very good item to pick up as like your second item in the game. So it is going to make champions weaker, but I still think people are going to build the item. So Sunfire Cape is getting a buff for next patch. Its cost is being lowered from 2.9k down to 2.75k, so a nice small buff here to champions like the Shen, the Sion, the Maokai. These top lane tank picks will get a little bit stronger with these changes for next patch. It's not going to make them that much stronger though, and this change alone will not make any champion like jump up anywhere on the tier list. So a nerf across the board here to pretty much every single jungler, or most junglers for 9.2, Challenging Smite and Chilling Smite, the damage is being lowered. Challenging Smite is also no longer going to grant you vision for the marked duration, and the dot duration on Challenging Smite is being lowered from 3 seconds down to 2 seconds. So with this change here, it's going to be pretty interesting to see if more junglers just stop building the jungle item, and if they just go for something like Talisman, Machete, and then just build a normal item as their first item and not even upgrade their jungle item. I don't think that's going to be the case because the damage decrease there, it isn't that much of a decrease. In the early game especially, it's not that big of a deal. Later on into the game, it does increase, or the damage decrease does get a little bit bigger, so it is a nerf to jungle, but I don't think it's really going to affect them that much. So damage stats from runes are being changed for next patch. They're nerfing the adaptive damage from 10 down to 9 for AP, 6 down to 5 for AD, and then for armor and magic resist, they are getting buffed, so 5 to 6 for armor, and then magic resist going from 6 to 8. So overall, it's not the end of the world. Like, it's only a 1 armor increase, it's only a 1 damage decrease, so it doesn't really mean too much. It does mean that early game champions do get very slightly weaker, and it does mean that weaker early game champions are going to have a little bit of a better time to survive in the early game. So Absolute Focus is getting a nerf for next patch. Bonus AD is being lowered, as well as the bonus AP, so this is going to be a nerf here to a lot of assassin champions, also going to be a nerf to a lot of poke champions for next patch. So I do think that more champions now are going to swap over to either Transcendence or Celerity for 9.2. I still think certain champions that have a very easy time staying above 70% HP will still go for Absolute Focus for 9.2, but I think it's going to be just taken a lot less, and it's no longer going to be just the #1 rune in that row. And then Overheal, Bloodline, and Cutdown are getting some pretty insignificant changes for next patch. Overheal is going to be a little bit weaker, it looks like, in the early game, but a bit stronger in the later game. Bloodline's also going to be a bit weaker in the early game and a bit stronger as you do get stacks. And then Cutdown is also getting a small change here. So I think that overall these changes don't really mean too much for 9.2. And then lastly, the final change for this patch is one to Ignite. The damage there is being lowered from 80 down to 70 in the early game, so a 10 damage nerf on Ignite. The cooldown is being lowered by 30 seconds though, from 210 down to 180, so I think that overall you aren't going to see less Ignite for 9.2. It's still going to be taken as a rune. I think that if they just did the straight up damage nerf and did not reduce the cooldown at all, then you would definitely see less of it, but I think that it should still be a great rune for this patch, and champions that are running it in 9.1 are still going to run it in 9.2. So that is going to be all for this video, guys. That's what we're looking at heading into the start of Season 9 and the start of the new ranked season. Hopefully you guys did enjoy this video. If you did, then be sure to drop a like and subscribe if you have yet to already. So thanks for watching, guys. Have an awesome day, and I will see you in my next video.